This video explains what is really going on in the world hotspots Ukraine, Belarus, and India, and answers the question whether Putin of Russia is the aggressor. Hello, friends, this is Unmasked Truth with Harmanjit Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events based on the unmasked truth that after surrender, Germany continued World War II clandestinely and became a killing machine. I also provide true news that you will find nowhere else. First, let's see what is going on in Belarus, a seemingly minor hotspot in Europe. The trouble started after President Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus was accused of rigging the last election in August 2020. There were nationwide demonstrations against the election results, which led to violent repression of protesters by the police, incarceration of thousands of protesters and opposition leaders and journalists, with dozens being tried and sentenced to jail terms. As a result, the European Union began imposing progressive economic sanctions against Belarus beginning in October 2020. Then on May 23, 2021, Belarus hijacked a Ryanair passenger airliner to Minsk, Belarus, went on a flight from Greece to Lithuania. The purpose was to arrest the Belarusian dissident journalist Roman Protasevich and his Russian girlfriend Sofia Spega. This led to further sanctions against Belarus by the EU. According to the Council of the EU website, the Council imposed restrictive measures against the Belarusian regime to respond to the escalation of serious human rights violations in Belarus and the violent repression of civil society, democratic opposition, and journalists, as well as to the forced landing of a Ryanair flight in Minsk on 23rd May 2021 and the related detention of journalists Roman Protasevich and Sofia Spega. Belarus then retaliated by causing the migrant crisis on the Belarus-Poland border. Belarus gave visas to its various embassies to would-be migrants, mainly from Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, as visitors to Belarus with the promise that they would be allowed to go to the Belarus-Polish border, where they can then enter Poland or then demand to be let in as asylum seekers. Once allowed in, they can go anywhere in the European Union they want. It is thought that Lukashenko was also trying to use Turkey's strategy of letting the migrant crisis get out of hand in the EU and then demand concessions and aid in return by stemming the tide of migrants passing through Belarus, as Turkey had done by stopping the flow of migrants through Turkey. The move by Belarus was condemned by European leaders and called a hijacking by some of them, and further sanctions were imposed on Belarus. The current situation on the crisis is that President Lukashenko blinked after a phone conversation with then German Chancellor Angela Merkel. The tension on the border seemed to have eased, and Belarus is left with the task of dealing with the migrants itself. We'll have to wait and see what the final outcome will be. I think Belarus might continue to use the migrant strategy to harass the EU as long as the sanctions remain. Roman Protasevich is still jailed and is unlikely to be ever freed by Belarus. The reason is that he is a German masquerader, meaning a person of German ancestry living in another country as a citizen, engaged in harassing and troubling Alexander Lukashenko, just as Alexei Navalny has harassed, maligned, and defamed Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Jamal Khashoggi was engaged in maligning and smearing the Saudi royal family. The Saudis dealt with Khashoggi appropriately by luring him to their consulate in Turkey and hacking him to pieces. I'm sure the Russians will deal with Alexei Navalny in their own way, and so will the Belarusians with Protasevich. So there is much more than meets the eye in the situation in Belarus. The Germans are behind it all, as they are behind all the most malicious form of violence in most countries in the world. The Germans do whatever they can to place German masqueraders as heads of government in European countries as much as possible. Of course, that's not always possible. The next alternative for them is to have the government be allied with them, through security alliances such as NATO or arm twisting or any other means necessary. However, one situation they cannot tolerate is having Israelites, particularly Jews, heading government in European countries. German hatred for President Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus and President Vladimir Putin of Russia stems from the fact that both are Jews. The Germans will do anything in their power to depose them. They will harass them using German masqueraders living in those countries and help masqueraders win elections. It seems the German masquerader population in Belarus is quite large and they have a fair shot at winning the presidency there. Alexander Lukashenko prevented that from happening. So the Germans started a campaign to harass and malign him and then found pretexts to impose crippling sanctions on Belarus. I do not expect the situation in Belarus to ease. The Germans will continue their harassment activities using German masqueraders in Belarus to make attempts to depose Lukashenko and install a masquerader or a non Jew as president. President Lukashenko cannot accept such continued interference in his country's internal affairs. He will continue to deal harshly with political opponents and dissidents, as most of them are German masqueraders attempting to take over the country. Now, German strategies in Belarus have to be analyzed just as American and Russian strategies were analyzed during the Cold War. Germany started both world wars. It is trying to start the Third World War again. Its dealings with all nations are designed to gain the advantage over all opponents to win the war this time. Germany's aim is world domination. It sees the United States, British Commonwealth nations, and the State of Israel as its top enemy. It is now forced to view Russia and Belarus as enemies because regimes in both countries are headed by Jews. Germany is trying to get Belarus in its sphere of influence by trying to depose President Lukashenko. If it succeeds in doing so, then its next goal will be to bring Belarus into the European Union and NATO. That is also what Germany is trying to do with Ukraine, which is why Ukraine is now a real major hotspot in the world. Russia's strategies to deal with the West are based primarily on security concerns as well as markets for its oil and gas products. Oil and gas products account for 62 to 64% of Russia's exports. Percentage of GDP from oil and oil products revenues fluctuates between 15 to 20%, and about 40% of its federal budget is funded by oil and gas revenues. Thus, Russia is quite dependent on export of gas, oil, and oil products. It needs the foreign exchange to be able to import all its needs. Therefore, it needs access to markets in Europe and Asia for its oil and gas exports. Incidentally, it is in Germany's interest to keep some sort of economic sanctions imposed on Russia so that its economy cannot diversify away from oil and gas products and that it remains dependent on energy exports for most of its foreign exchange needs so that Germany and Europe can get all the supply they need, as Russia will want to export as much as possible just to fund its federal budgets. However, Germany does has many German corporations are setting up shop in Russia also to take whatever advantage they can of the large masquerader population who it's sure will buy German and German products. It will also provide then jobs for those German masqueraders in Russia. Now, security concerns weigh heavily in Russian calculations. Russia was invaded twice, once by Napoleon and then by Nazi Germany during World War II, with devastating consequences for Russia and the invaders. That's why during World War II, Russia occupied as much of Eastern Europe as it could as a buffer zone. Then dissolution of the Soviet Union took place from late 1988 to December 1991 when the German masquerader Communist Party boss Mikhail Gorbachev started political and economic reforms due to the declining economy. Various Soviet republics began agitating for greater economy. A military coup was attempted in August 1991 to restore the authoritarian system but collapsed in 3 days. Though Gorbachev was replaced, separation of the various Soviet republics was virtually a done deal, completed in December 1991. The masquerader Gorbachev's goal was reunification of Germany, which was achieved in October 1990. But then he went on to orchestrate the dissolution of the Soviet Union, which he masterfully accomplished. Of course, other German masqueraders in the various former Soviet republics helped in the process. Russian President Vladimir Putin told the nation on April 25, 2005, that the collapse of the Soviet Empire was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century. Reunification of Germany and breakup of the Soviet Union should give us the idea about what Germans and German masqueraders around the globe acting in concert can accomplish. Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong, through whom God founded the modern era of his church, astutely observed at the end of World War II that we, the United States and Britain, can win military wars, but we seldom win the war of the peace that follows, meaning negotiations and relationships after we win the war. He was speaking primarily about our dealings with the Germans. The reasons are twofold. First, the Germans are guided by the wily, diabolically cunning, and crafty Satan the devil. He communicates with them, and they obey him without question. He is the real author of their cunning. Second, we negotiate with fairness and ethics in mind, and an inherent desire to achieve long lasting peace and reach a settlement quickly so that we can begin living in peace. The Germans have no such ethical or fairness constraints. They are not interested in peace, only world domination through trickery if possible, but ultimately through victory and war. So the Germans continue to extract as much concessions as they can from us in negotiations. Putin and Russia have experienced the Nazis during the Second World War. With what Gorbachev achieved, the EU and NATO are now right at Russia's doorsteps. Belarus and Ukraine are the largest buffer Russia has left against an invasion by the EU led by Germany. That's why, for its security reasons, Russia cannot afford to allow either of those countries to become part of the EU or NATO. Putin has ensured that Belarus will not slip away by supporting President Lukashenko's bid to stay in power. Ukraine has been a challenge. Before current President Volodymyr Zelensky, the German masquerader Petro Poroshenko was the president for 5 years from 2014 to 2019. Before becoming president, he helped in the protests that followed the suspension of negotiation for Ukraine to join the EU with the help of his media outlets. Russians in Ukraine acted by declaring separatist republics, the Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic, controlling a large part of the region. Meanwhile, in March 2014, Russia had annexed Crimea. Putin acted to prevent Ukraine from slipping into the EU and NATO orbit. Again, it is German masqueraders in Ukraine who nearly succeeded in bringing it into the EU fold and German orbit. This is at the heart of what is going on in Ukraine. That's why Russia has amassed 100,000 troops at the Ukraine border. But why now? The reason should be obvious. Germany and China have been planning to start the Third World War for the past 3 to 4 years. They could start the war literally any day. I have already outlined their attempts to start it in India in my other videos. They had tried to inveigle Iran into starting the war when General Soleimani, based on Chinese promises of support, boasted that he would challenge President Trump. But he was bumped off on January 3, 2020. When the war starts, Germany wants to cover all its bases. The main target for the war is the United States, British Commonwealth nation, and the State of Israel. Germany and China do not want Russia to be free to engage them. Therefore, they want to ensure that Russia is tied up in a war of its own when they take on the United States and British Commonwealth nations. The prophecy concerning this war was given by Jesus Christ in Matthew 24, verse 7. For nation shall rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. So when Germany starts the war with the United States and Britain, it wants nations around the world engaged in many wars of their own so that none can join hands with the United States and Britain. As soon as the war starts, Germany will try to engage Russia in a little war of its own. The provocation could be Germany urging Ukraine to declare its intention to become part of NATO or the EU, and Ukraine sending troops to take full control of the region held by ethnic Russian rebels in Donetsk and Luhansk. Either provocation will invite Russian intervention. Russia is anticipating such an action. That's why it has amassed troops on the Ukraine-Russia border. I don't think Vladimir Putin will invade Ukraine without first being provoked by Ukraine at the instigation of Germany and the EU. Or the provocation could also come through the EU taking some action against Belarus. That's what is going on in Ukraine. It's Germany preparing to provoke Russia into a mini war of its own through German masquerader proxies in Ukraine and Belarus so that it, the EU, and China are free to prosecute the war against the USA and Britain without having to worry about Russia. Of course, China is also trying to bolster friendly relations with Russia so that it stays neutral in its war with the USA. But to cover all bases, Germany is trying to divert Russia's attention towards its own western border by involving it in a mini war so that Germany, China, and their allies can concentrate on defeating the United States, British Commonwealth nations, and Israel first. Now, Sikhs in India number only around 23 million, but Sikhism is a religion and not an ethnic group. So some Rajputs, Pathans or Pashtuns, a few Baniyans, and some of other ethnic groups are also Sikhs. Their loyalties lie with the ethnic groups which are allied with the Germans and not with Punjabi Sikhs. So this is what is going on in the situation in India. Therefore, the number of Punjabi Sikhs targeted by the Germans for destruction because they fought against the Germans in both world wars as part of the British and Indian armies is less, perhaps only 20 to 21 million. Germany and its Indian allies have made many attempts to destroy the Sikhs. Though Sikhs in the hundreds of thousands have lost their lives since India's independence, the attempts to destroy the Sikhs have not succeeded so far. But Germany and its Indian allies will not give up making more attempts since they seem to be an easy and relatively defenseless targets for them to overwhelm. Then Sikhs in the Indian Armed Services number perhaps 80,000. The number of Punjabi Sikhs is perhaps only between 50 to 60,000. Besides making many attempts to commit genocide on the Sikhs, the Germans, since the Doklam Plateau standoff between China, India, and Bhutan in 2017, have been trying first to kill all the Punjabi Sikhs in military uniform. All their attempts have been foiled so far. The most recent attempt was foiled by sending a strong warning to India by the US military allied with Indians who are not allied with the Germans by killing the topmost Indian General Bipin Rawat by bringing down his helicopter, which also killed his wife and 12 others. General Rawat was appointed Chief of the Defense Staff to coordinate all the military services and be the one point of contact with the Indian government. He was a Rajput who were allied with the Germans. All the war planning to benefit the German-Chinese-Indian alliance and execution of the plans was in the plans in India was in the hands of General Rawat till he was assassinated. German, Chinese, and the Indians allied with the Germans' overall goal is to let North India be conquered and brought under Chinese rule, who will then commit genocide against them, particularly the Sikhs and other Punjabis, as they have done in Tibet and are doing in Xinjiang against the Uyghurs. For this purpose, they are encouraging Muslim countries in the vicinity of India to start the war, which effort will be supported by China, Germany, and part of the Indian military allied with the Germans, which is the greatest part of the military. It is now becoming clear that besides destroying the Sikhs and killing all Punjabi Sikhs in military uniform, General Rawat and Prime Minister Narendra Modi's strategy under German and Chinese guidance, they do take their orders from Germany and China, was to disaffect the 200 million strong Indian Muslims against Hindu rule, particularly the Kashmiri Muslims, so that they will support Muslim invaders in the event of war. I will later provide evidence that a Muslim invasion of India is being planned by the Germans and Chinese. But first, let's briefly see the attempts Modi and General Rawat have made to disaffect the Muslims of India against Hindu rule. These attempts have been highly successful so that Muslims in India are on edge and no longer trust the Modi government and states ruled by his BJP party. I have already provided details on these attempts in my videos on General Rawat's killing, so I will just provide a list of these attempts. First, the Citizenship Amendment Act was passed by the Government of India on December 12, 2019. It amended the Indian Citizenship Act to accept illegal migrants who are Hindu, Sikh, Jain, Parsi, Buddhist, and Christian, but did not mention refugees who were either Muslims, Rohingyas from Myanmar, Sri Lanka Tamils, or Tibetans. It led to widespread demonstrations as Muslims felt discriminated against. At least 31 people were shot dead by police, most of whom were Muslims, hundreds arrested and jailed. Secondly, in August 2020, Articles 370 and 35A that granted special status to Jammu and Kashmir were repealed. Communications to Kashmir were cut off for months, and thousands of extra Indian security forces were deployed to suppress the resulting protests and violence. The protests, violence, and terrorism resulted in the death of a total of 96 civilians, 81 security forces personnel, and 366 terrorists in Kashmir since the repeal of Article 370 till November 2021, according to Government of India figures. Most of the top Muslim leaders from the state were jailed following the repeal. Muslim leaders in Kashmir had also orchestrated the murder of Hindus, forcing many to flee the state so that they could grab their lands. A few of the murderers are being brought to justice, which has put fear in the minds of others of being held accountable. As a result, Kashmiri Muslims in the state have already been disaffected against Hindu rulers and the presence of Indian security personnel in their state. The Pashtuns in Pakistan and Afghanistan have coveted Kashmir and orchestrated the 1947 and 1965 wars against India to annex it to Pakistan or make it an independent Muslim state. They made other attempts during the 1971 Bangladesh Liberation War and the Kargil skirmishes in May to July of 1999. With the repeal of Kashmir's special status and the subsequent suppression of Muslims, the Pashtuns can now rely on support from the local Muslim population in a war to annex Kashmir. The terrorists from Pakistan operated uh, in Indian occupied Kashmir because they had support from local Kashmiris. That support has now solidified because of the revocation of Articles 370 and 35A. Number 3. Since Modi came to power in 2014, lynchings of Muslims have multiplied. In India, killing cows and the consumption of beef is already banned in most states. But the Modi government, in a bid to terrorize Muslims, has used the beef ban to allow lynching of innocent Muslims, often only on suspicion or outright fabricated accusations of killing cows or even consuming beef. In an August 2019 article, NPR reported, since the Hindu Nationalist Party, that is Modi's BJP, won power in India 5 years ago, lynchings of minorities have surged. Human Rights Watch counted at least 44 murders over 3 years. Hundreds more have been injured. There have been very few prosecutions and hardly any public outrage. The number of people injured in these lynchings all over India is in the hundreds. Number 4. To the disaffected Muslims must be added the millions of Muslims who are Pathans or trace their origins to Iran or other Islamic countries, who always resented Hindu rule and have harbored dreams of Muslim rule harking back to the days of the Mughal Empire in India. These disaffected Muslims will not try to resist a foreign Muslim invader attempting to conquer Kashmir and other parts of North India. Some will even actively assist in the conquest. Now, about a coalition against North India. Pashtuns in Pakistan and Afghanistan have always dreamed of the days of Ahmad Shah Abdali, also known as Durrani, when the Afghans invaded India and looted at will and appointed governors favorable to them. The Pashtuns are of Iranian origin. China tried to inveigle Iran to start the Third World War. That attempt fell flat after General Qasem Soleimani was assassinated. But Iran will willingly join any coalition against the US and its allies, the Punjabis, hoping to become the dominant power in the Islamic world. With the help of German masqueraders in leadership positions in the USA and Britain, the Germans have been successful in orchestrating the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban without a fight. A Pashtun, Imran Khan, is the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Thus, Pashtuns rule both Pakistan and Afghanistan. ISIS-K is gaining strength in Afghanistan. Most likely, many foreign fighters who were formerly in various branches of ISIS and Al-Qaeda are already gathering or are ready to go to Afghanistan and join ISIS-K, which will join the Pashtun coalition. Kashmiri Muslims have been thoroughly alienated from Indian rule because of Modi government's policies and oppression. Most of the Kashmiri Muslim leaders encouraged and abetted atrocities against Hindus in Kashmir, for which they are likely to be brought to justice. The Germans and Chinese could not have hoped for better circumstances for their coalition to attack and conquer Kashmir, Punjab, and other parts of North India and make them part of their Pashtun Muslim empire. But China is very much in the picture too. It wants access to the mineral wealth of Afghanistan and wants more of Kashmir as part of China, as it already occupies Aksai Chin. It claims that Kashmir is a disputed region between India and China and had criticized the revocation of Articles 370 and 35A. The evidence that Modi's India is in collusion with China regarding China's plans to occupy North India is provided by the skirmishes on the Doklam Plateau in June 2017, Galwan Valley in May 2020, and China building villages within Indian territory in Arunachal Pradesh state of India. In each of these skirmishes, China was worsted by India, but Modi and General Rawat allowed China to occupy more Indian territory and even defended it, saying China has not built fortifications and villages in Indian side of the river. This is treason of the highest order. Modi does and General Rawat did whatever they were ordered by Germany and China to do. When the Muslim coalition consisting of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran, supported by China, attacks Kashmir and Punjab, Indian army, instead of fighting it, will most likely facilitate the takeover of North India so that the Pashtuns in China can commit genocide, enslave the survivors, and divide the land among themselves. There is a sideshow going on between Taiwan and China. China has been intimidating Taiwan by violating its airspace by flying hundreds of military aircraft through Taiwan airspace since early October 2021. It has also carried out large amphibious landing drills on the mainland side of the Taiwan Strait. In late November or early December, A nuclear-powered submarine was also found to be cruising in the waters of the Taiwan Strait. While this show of force is escalating tension in the region, I doubt if China will provoke the Third World War by attacking Taiwan or US military vessels or aircraft in the region. Germany and China's goal is to have their proxies provoke the war by attacking US allies. They will then wait for US response before deciding their own response. It seems North India is the real hotspot where Germany and China will provoke a war by having their Muslim coalition partners attack Kashmir and Punjab. They will let Modi's India do the fighting on their behalf to facilitate the conquest of North India and wait to see how the US responds. As far as the US is concerned, I've always stated no matter who starts the war on their behalf, Germany and China will always remain the number one and number two targets respectively because of the horrendous atrocities they've already committed by murdering more than 10 million white Americans, by cremating them alive in electric crematoriums, and by other means such as medical murder. They have also had perhaps hundreds of thousands of American and British citizens murdered by abroad by offering financial incentives to the murderers. Therefore, Germany will always be target number one. China has a joint stockpile of nuclear weapons and ICBMs with Germany. It has also engaged in killing Americans with dangerous drugs and any other means possible. It will be supporting the coalition that attacks us or our allies. Hence, it will always remain target number two. Once the war in North India starts, we can expect many wars in Ukraine and Belarus, the Middle East, and other hotspots around the world. But I expect the fuse of the Third World War to be lit in North India. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please continue to watch my videos and read my articles on important world events, World War III watch, politics, international business, advice on health and medical problems, and much more for in-depth and insightful analysis. Please also subscribe to my YouTube and Facebook channels, Unmasked Truth with Harmanjit Saini, to view and get information on the latest videos. Some people do not have the time to go through the full length of videos. They find it more convenient to read the text of the videos. Unfortunately, YouTube does not provide the facility to make the text of my videos available on YouTube. But fortunately, Facebook does provide that facility. So I make the text of my videos available on my Facebook channel, which you can then easily copy.